2 weeks and 3 days had passed since Alone left Tyria, the capital of the Kingdom of Asteria. He was currently crossing the southern desert, a necessary passage before reaching Colony. Phew! Alone glanced at the scorching sun, feeling as if just breathing in and out was enough to sear his lungs. It's filthy hot. At Evan's voice, who was blankly staring at the sky, Alone nodded in agreement, albeit with difficulty. No matter how well made the carriage was, it couldn't block out the heat. If only I had an ice crystal stone. Evan was lamenting about an artifact so expensive that even purchasing one required the cost of several mansions. His tongue hung out like a dog's, which looked quite ridiculous, but Alone couldn't bring himself to laugh. The desert was, quite frankly, unbelievably scorching. I should have already arrived by now if only I'd moved a little faster. With a soft sigh, thoughts flickered through Alone's mind. In reality, Alone had arrived at the edge of the desert just over a week after heading toward Colony. If he had entered the desert immediately back then, he could have already reached Colony. But there were 2 reasons why Alone had been lingering in the desert. One was because he made a brief stop in another territory to prepare a gift for the seal ring in Colony. Even if it's our first meeting, and they don't help, I should at least bring a gift. As a result, even though he should have already arrived in Colony, Alone was now still traversing the desert under the scorching sun. In retrospect, it didn't matter whether he left early or late, as the distance to cross the desert was the same. But as he felt the burning sun, Alone couldn't help but feel somewhat unfair. Phew! How much time had passed since those unreasonable thoughts stirred in him? We're camping here. Just as the blazing sun began to sink and turn into a sunset, Alone heard a voice from outside and stepped out of the carriage. What he saw was a line of dozens of carriages on the dimming ground, each with a small lantern hanging from it. This was the second reason Alone had delayed his departure. I've been seeing this for 5 days straight, but it still gives a sense of security the more I see it. At Evan's remark, Alone nodded. He had been traveling with a caravan to cross the desert. He knew far too well that crossing such a vast desert alone was a terrible idea. By the way, Count. While watching the merchant starting to set up camp as per the caravan leader's command, Evan spoke up. What is it? Are you not going to practice magic? Though trying to act indifferent, Evan couldn't hide the hint of anticipation in his expression. Alone, who was momentarily puzzled, soon realized what Evan was getting at and replied. I plan to, but it will be different from the magic I've been studying so far. Ah. Evan looked a little disappointed, but Alone had no intention of giving in. After months of research, he had mastered his current magic to the point that practicing it now was meaningless. Can't you practice just once? No. Evan sighed in regret at Alone's firm refusal. But his disappointment was short-lived. Whoa, that's just completely flat. You'd think it was a bug. As the sun finally disappeared and the weather turned chilly, Alone lit a campfire and followed Evan's gaze. Evan was looking at 5 people. One was a man dressed in quite luxurious clothes, and another was a woman with fiery red hair that seemed to symbolize flames. Behind them stood mercenaries, each holding their respective weapons. The caravan leader and the mage from the Red Tower. Not a day goes by without seeing them. Alone knew them well. In fact, it was impossible not to know. The man groveling before the red-haired mage and mercenaries was none other than the leader of the golden-haired caravan, and the mage had been picking fights with Alone at every opportunity lately. Look at him, offering food without fail every day. Does he have no pride? Evan shook his head, watching the caravan leader diligently rub his hands together and present high-quality wine and food once again. However, both Evan and Alone understood why the caravan leader was acting so submissive toward the mage. From the caravan leader's perspective, it was a great advantage to be on friendly terms with a mage from the Magic Tower, especially since the mage in question was the daughter of the Red Tower Master. Although she had not yet ascended to the position of Vice Tower Master, she was already ranked at the 4th level at the young age of 23. In the world of trade, where connections were as important as business acumen, it made sense for the caravan leader to treat her with utmost reverence. While Alone himself was also in a position where important connections naturally gravitated toward him, it seemed that the caravan leader, unaware of Alone's recent rise as a faction leader, had decided not to bother building a relationship with him. More precisely, it was likely that the caravan leader had wanted to befriend both sides but, due to the mage's ongoing conflict with Alone, chose to focus all efforts on her. As Alone absent-mindedly watched the caravan leader bowing, he soon realized that the mage had noticed him staring. What are you looking at? The sharp-eyed woman, Leanne Aguileras, quickly caught on and approached to pick a fight with him. Just happened to glance over. "Do you enjoy spying on others?" Leanne started provoking him without hesitation, her voice tinged with contempt and scorn. "I don't have that kind of hobby." "Is that so?" "My mistake. I thought someone who eagerly spreads rumors might also enjoy peeping." Despite Alone's neutral response, Leanne continued to provoke him. He let out a sigh. How tiresome. Alone wasn't entirely sure why she constantly picked fights with him. However, he could guess a few reasons, one of which was the rumors. Word had spread, primarily among the mags of the Blue Tower and Caliban, that Alone had played a significant role in dealing with foreign threats using magic. Though Alone had never spoken a word about it, Leanne seemed convinced that he had personally spread the rumors. Another reason she antagonized him was, "I've said it several times, I didn't spread the rumors. You're as evasive as the Blue Tower." It seemed that Leanne harbored a strong hatred for the Blue Tower. Behind his expressionless face, Alone stifled a laugh. Even if Alone seemed suspicious to her, picking fights so openly wasn't exactly a rational behavior, even in this world. But Alone merely listened to her provocations because they felt too childish to elicit any real reaction from him. That, however, was only part of the reason. The real reason he tolerated her was her status. Unlike Pina, Leanne held no formal position in the Red Tower. However, being the daughter of the Red Tower Master was a far more intimidating title than any official rank. Although the Red Tower Master had dramatically died after single-handedly charging at one of the 5 great sins who destroyed the Red Tower, he was not a minor character, even in the game. In other words, the Red Tower Master's fiery temperament had driven him to embrace death itself. In simpler terms, he was considered a madman. Seeing the caliber of mercenaries around Leanne, despite her not being particularly strong for a 4th-rank mage, it was clear how much her father valued her. "Well, it's not like I'll be seeing her again once I finish crossing the desert." Alone decided to brush off her provocations for now. HMPH. Noticing that Alone was only half-heartedly responding, Leanne scowled and turned sharply, heading back to her carriage. Alone shook his head as he watched her leave. The next day, Rad, the leader of the golden-haired caravan, who traveled across various kingdoms except for the Empire, where over 30 wagons couldn't pass, smiled as the sun beat down on him. Sweat dripped from his large body, showing how much his flesh was suffering from the heat, but his face was filled with satisfaction. And with good reason, he now had the chance to build a connection with the daughter of the Red Tower Master. If everything went well, he might even secure a supply contract to regularly deliver goods to the Red Tower in the city they were heading to. Thus, despite the scorching heat, Rad was feeling quite happy. It would have been nice to build ties with the noble too. Rad glanced back with a slight look of regret. The carriage of Count Palacio, who was traveling with the caravan, stood at the end, but Rad didn't seem particularly concerned, aside from the faint regret. Rad, a veteran of the trade route, knew all too well that it was impossible to catch 2 rabbits at once. Moreover, he didn't find it too disappointing not to befriend Alone, considering the rumors about his magic prowess seemed a bit exaggerated for someone of his 3rd-level abilities. Leanne had repeatedly assured Rad that Alone's magic power didn't match the rumors, so it wasn't too disappointing to let that connection slip. Of course, if Rad had been more up-to-date with the latest news, the situation might have been different. Unfortunately, he only knew that Alone had some ties with one of Caliban's master knights. In any case, Rad continued his journey through the searing heat, relatively content with his circumstances. "Everyone, prepare for battle!" At the sudden shout from a mercenary at the front of the caravan, Rad frowned. If the mercenaries were calling for battle in the middle of the desert, there could only be one reason. TSK, bandits! Rad sighed as he thought of the bandits who roamed this vast desert, targeting caravans, but his face showed no signs of fear. And why would it? The golden-haired caravan had dozens of mercenaries that Rad had hired, along with over 10 B-ranked mercenaries tasked with guarding the daughter of the Red Tower Master. In other words, Rad was confident that no ordinary group of bandits could harm the caravan. However, the moment he saw the massive flag in the distance, Rad's face turned pale with fear, and his eyes widened in horror. The banner approaching through the cloud of dust was one that no merchant should ever encounter. Blood Sand? The name of the infamous bandit group came to Rad's mind, and his face quickly filled with terror. Even from a distance, it was clear there were dozens of them, and each member of the Blood Sand bandits was said to be as strong as a knight. Swoosh! Before Rad's thoughts could finish, one of the bandits at the front swung a chain sickle toward a mercenary, instantly taking his life. And with that, the battle began. No, it was more of a massacre. The bandits, who clearly had no intention of negotiating, slaughtered the mercenaries protecting the wagons in mere moments. Just like that. Incredible, isn't it? In less than 2 minutes, most of the mercenaries had been killed by the Bloodsand bandits, and a man stepped forward. Wearing an eye patch on one side and twin scimitars on his waist, he surveyed the bloody scene with a cold smile. Oh. Among the elite mercenaries still barely holding out, the man spotted the mage, Lian, filled with fear and tension, and his twisted grin widened. Well, look at this. We really hit the jackpot. His voice was filled with excitement. Who are you? Lian frowned and asked sharply, but the man simply drew one of the scimitars from his waist and replied. You'll find out once you come with me. He grinned wickedly and infused his sword with magic. As blue energy began to blaze from his sword like fire, Lian's expression grew grim. Despite his casual demeanor, she felt a deep sense of dread as she recognized how powerful the aura emanating from his sword was, far beyond that of ordinary knights. In that moment, she realized there was no way to escape. That, perhaps, a fate worse than death awaited her. As this terrifying thought crossed her mind, past traumas began to flood through her memories, her body trembling uncontrollably at the mere recollection. She could feel the horrible memories gnawing away at her sanity, taking over her mind. But just as Lian's mind was on the verge of collapsing, dash! Something brought her back to her senses. It was the air. The hyperventilation triggered by her trauma suddenly ceased. Slowly, her breath escaped, forming a visible mist. And in that moment, as the white vapor became visible in the air, Lian realized something. The air, which had been suffocatingly hot just moments ago, had now turned icy cold. What? As Lian stood there, dumbfounded, she noticed that the twisted grin on the man's face had also morphed into a look of confusion. Not only had the once hot ground grown cold, but frost had begun to form on the sand. And then... Step! In the dead silence, the sound of footsteps echoed. The bandits turned their attention toward the sound. The mercenaries, who had been tense and fearful just moments ago, also shifted their gaze. The man, who had been holding his scimitars and targeting Lian, turned his eyes as well. And there, where Lian, who had just been consumed by her trauma, now stared. A man was walking forward. Step! His pace was neither hurried nor slow. Step! His expression remained impassive, as though the situation held no significance for him. Step! The ashen energy flowing from his bracelet merged with the surrounding cold, and finally, he stopped. At that moment. Freeze! Count Palacio murmured a phrase. Lian Aguileras doesn't like lies. It goes beyond mere dislike, she despises them. This hatred stems from her experiences growing up as the daughter of a Red Tower master. She enjoyed abundant privileges, but with that came countless lies and deceptions. Lies that were so intense they left her traumatized. Thus, she came to hate lies with an almost compulsive aversion, and this loathing intensified when the liar in question was a magician, a result of the trauma from her childhood. So, when Lian Aguileras first met Count Palacio, she instinctively despised him. Despite the rumors that Count Palacio had contributed greatly to capturing foreign threats, Lian saw him as weak. He lacked the sai that is essential for becoming a high-ranking magician, but Lian, having a decent amount of talent, could easily see Alone's mana. It was pitiful, barely a flicker of power. While he was undoubtedly a magician, the meager amount of mana he possessed wouldn't even qualify him to reach the second tier. This reminded her of another rumor, one that suggested Count Palacio wasn't the hero who stopped the foreign threats, but rather the benefactor of Deus Macallion, one of the Master Knights. The idea that he had stolen the glory of Deus Macallion quickly rooted itself in her mind as the truth, leading Lian to develop a deep hatred for the Count. Yes, that must have been it. But how? Lian now stared at Alone in shock. More precisely, she was watching the phenomenon Alone had created. A chilling space had formed around him, spreading wide across the scorching desert, freezing the very air in the middle of this blazing land. When she saw frost starting to form on the sand near him, Lian couldn't comprehend what was happening. This was a spell that could never be manifested by the amount of mana Alone possessed. And it wasn't just that. Though she didn't understand how the spell was cast, Lian could grasp its structure. Compound magic, and at least 3 different spells. Compound magic. To explain it theoretically would take a long time, but simply put, it refers to linking 2 or more spells together. Of course, linking spells is no easy task. Various elements must be added to implement magic, but the basic arrangement structure must still be followed. In short, linking spells meant this: if even one structure is disrupted, the entire magic is nullified. The magician must re-establish the spells with their own equation to make it work. The difficulty of linking increases exponentially with each additional spell, making it a challenge that only magicians of at least the 5th tier can attempt. That's why, as Leanne dumbly watched Alone prepare his next spell, she witnessed something. The man with the eye patch, who had been standing in front of her just moments ago, had suddenly reached Alone. No one had noticed how it happened. It was over in an instant. Mercenaries, who belatedly realized that protecting Alone was their best strategy, quickly turned their bodies. Leanne, too, instinctively started to prepare her magic to aid Alone, but it was already too late. The man with an eye patch was standing before Alone with a sly smile, poised to swing his twin scimitars. However, what Leanne saw was not Alone's head being severed. Freeze! Snapdash! It was the man with an eye patch, frozen in place. Frozen in the very posture of swinging his twin scimitars, the man turned into an ice statue in that brief moment. Shatter! With Alone's low murmur. Crack! Crash! The ice shattered, and the body of the man who had driven them to despair was instantly broken into countless fragments. Silence! Who? With a quiet exhale from Alone, a white breath once again swept over him. Retracting the hand that had formed the seals even Leanne couldn't fully comprehend. I'll give you a chance. He spoke, as if he had anticipated everything. Without any change in expression, he looked coldly at the group of bandits, who were now frozen in fear. Get lost. It was a quiet yet unmistakably clear pronouncement, carrying a sharp intent that no one could misinterpret. With just a single attack, the bandits, having lost their leader in an instant, hesitated briefly before turning to flee in all directions. Watching Alone calmly dispel his magic as if nothing had happened, Leanne realized just how ignorant she had been and continued to stare at him. A hint of admiration flickered in her eyes. As he watched the retreating figures of the bandits, who had fled in a heartbeat, Alone felt a sense of relief and bewilderment hidden behind his expressionless face. Things didn't go exactly as planned, but it worked out in the end, so that's a relief. Alone knew about the Bloods and bandits. They appeared as part of a side story in the game. In the game, this bandits had a characteristic where, once their leader was dealt with, the remaining members would scatter. That was why he aimed to take down the leader quickly, and he had succeeded as intended. Though, it was unexpected that the leader had rushed at him before he had even fully manipulated the magic array. It seems reducing the penalty worked. Alone suddenly felt the searing desert heat seep back into his bones. The cold that had spread from him moments ago was from a spell he had spent over half a year developing after returning from Caliban, the Extreme Cold. This spell, which required the simultaneous use of spatial magic, frost magic, and maintenance magic, had the effect of temporarily transforming the surrounding environment to resemble the frozen tundra of the north. However, for Alone, this transformation was critical. The extreme cold was important because it allowed me to partially fulfill one of the 4 conditions required to twist the world's laws for killing foreign entities. Magic must be used on the land of extreme cold. In other words, the spell allowed him to reduce the number of penalties he bore from 4 to 3, making it quite valuable for him. The negative consequences of these conditions limited his magical abilities. The magic I linked with the extreme cold spell worked well. The difference in difficulty between bearing 1 fewer penalty is indeed substantial. Even though the spell itself became more powerful than I had initially expected, due to the belt. Though Alone felt momentarily disoriented by the unexpected surge in power. Well, I suppose that's a good thing. Shrugging his shoulders, he consciously reached for the ornament around his waist, a belt adorned with 3 amethysts, called the Belt of the Forgotten. This item doubled both the damage he inflicted and the damage he received, a feature that applied to Alone even with the 3 penalties he was carrying. If I can obtain that item here, I could remove 1 more penalty for sure. Thinking this, Alone loosened the belt and tucked it into his pocket. I'll still need to adjust the extreme cold spell. For consuming the power of 3 spells, its duration is far too short. It barely lasts a minute. I should look into improving that. With these thoughts in mind, he returned to the carriage. From that day, including the next, as they neared the desert city, 2 changes occurred in Alone's life. Count Palacio. This is a special wine produced in Gur, and it's said to taste absolutely wonderful. How about a glass? Thank you. And this here is ham that I brought to sell as a local specialty in the city. Would you like to try it? It's incredibly delicious. The first change was the attitude of Rad, the head of the golden-haired caravan, which had shifted 180 degrees. In the span of just one night, Rad had presented Alone with even more lavish gifts than he had offered Leon over the past few days, acting as if he would give him anything, even his liver and heart. If there's anything else you desire, please don't hesitate to let me know. Rad fawned over Alone so much that it seemed his hands would wear out from all the groveling, before disappearing after bowing deeply. That man's attitude changed 180, no, 360 degrees. Wouldn't 360 degrees mean he stayed the same? I meant his reaction changed that much. The second change was Count Palacio. Leon Aguileras? Yes, if it's not an inconvenience, I'd like to discuss magic with you. Would that be all right? Leon Aguileras' attitude toward Alone had completely changed. On the night the bandits attacked, she had bowed deeply to him, something that seemed impossible for her pride, offering an apology. From the next day on, she began to seek out Alone frequently, asking various questions about magic. So, you mean this part can be arranged arbitrarily in the magic array? Yes, to use compound magic, you need to maintain the structure, so instead of fixing the array, you twist it through rotation. Leon Aguileras' conversations with Alone proved to be quite beneficial for him. Until now, Alone had been self-taught in magic, relying on twisting spells through language alone. Leon's questions and knowledge provided him with valuable academic insight. Whenever he explained an array structure that was slightly superior to hers, she would unconsciously or perhaps consciously react with soft murmurs like "Co. I see," which Alone found quite satisfying. Of course, as their conversations increased, the overly admiring gaze she began to send his way felt a little awkward. Here you go. And this is a potion. Today as well, as soon as their conversation ended, Leon naturally handed him a mana recovery potion. Though it wasn't of the highest grade like the ones Pena had given him, the potion Leon handed him daily was still fairly expensive, leaving Alone feeling a bit embarrassed behind his expressionless face. You don't have to bring a gift every time you visit. I'm learning from you. Please, don't feel burdened and just accept it. Since she insisted on giving him a potion almost every time they met, Alone eventually ended up receiving about 4 mana potions by the time they arrived at the desert city. After a journey of more than a week, Alone arrived in the desert city, parting ways with Rad, who had told him to rely on him for anything, and Leon, who promised to formally apologize to him again sometime later. It's understandable for a merchant, but the daughter of a Red Tower mage has changed so much that it's hard to adjust, muttered Evan as he watched Leon walk away. With that, Alone entered the desert city, leisurely taking in his surroundings. Aside from the sandy hue of the buildings, it wasn't much different from the capital of Asteria. However, one structure stood out, the gigantic Colosseum that could even be seen from the south gate, which seemed to symbolize the colony itself and exuded an overwhelming presence. It looks like it could hold more than 100,000 people. Gazing at the massive Colosseum visible even beyond countless other buildings, Alone shared his thoughts and began walking with Evan toward where Sealround was. After about 20 minutes. Well, noble lord, care to have a chat with us? Alone was confronted. In front of him and Evan stood a group of over 10 men who, at a glance, clearly screamed, "We're thugs." Yet, interestingly enough, the surrounding mercenaries simply watched the situation without intervening, despite the thugs picking a fight with Alone. Some even seemed entertained, as if this was a common occurrence, while others pretended not to notice the situation at all. It was a very strange atmosphere. If things go well, we could even introduce you to our boss, Marlian. How about that? The thug's words immediately made Alone understand the odd situation. These guys must be Marlian's men. Recalling the name of Marlian, one of the 4 Baba Yagas of the colony, also known by the ominous titled Beast of Horror, Alone soon realized his mistake. This is Marlian's territory. Alone remembered that, in the game, whenever you entered Marlian's area, thugs like these would try to extort you. Sighing resignedly, Alone thought, do I have no choice but to let them rob me? He knew that fighting here would be a bad move. Dealing with the thugs blocking his way would be easy, but doing so would put him at odds with one of the 4 Baba Yagas. This would create unnecessary restrictions for Alone, who needed to operate in the colony for the next few days. Just as he began to reach into his pocket. Thud. Hey, are you sighing with us right in front of you? The thug who had been smirking a twisted smile just moments ago lightly tapped Alone's forehead. It was as if he was mocking a child, grinning crookedly. Evan, standing beside Alone, instinctively furrowed his brow and reached for his sword, but... Boom! The thug who had tapped Alone's forehead was suddenly slammed to the side, crashing into a nearby building. It had happened in an instant. Both Evan and Alone wore bewildered expressions as they looked at the thug who had been thrown across the street, while the other thugs who had been smirking just moments ago had their expressions freeze in shock. Hey! And then? What do you think you're doing to my master? Crackle. Who? Why don't you tell me? Accompanied by lightning. Explain what you just did. The faces of the thugs who had been laughing earlier quickly transformed into ones of fear and panic. Go on, explain yourself. Golden eyes gleamed with fury. A-class fighter Balaam. Among fighters ranging from F-class to A-class, he was considered one of the top in terms of combat ability. It was just an ordinary day for him, relaxing with a drink at a pub he often visited, as there was no scheduled duel. Until a nobleman appeared before his eyes. The nobleman, dressed opulently without trying to conceal his wealth, was strolling through the city for the first time. Unsurprisingly, he got caught by Adigo and his gang. Adigo, an A-class fighter of a higher rank. Even then, it still felt like just another ordinary day. Balaam had seen Adigo extort money or goods from merchants or nobles who wandered into the colony several times before. Look at those fancy clothes. Jackpot! We'll make some good money off this one. The fighters beside Balaam chatted casually as they watched the nobleman surrounded by Adigo's gang. None of the fighters in the pub or nearby shops had any intention of helping the nobleman. Even though there was another A-class fighter present, they simply watched Adigo robbing the noble with lazy, indifferent eyes, taking no action. It was only natural. There was nothing to gain from helping that nobleman. Even if the noble offered immediate payment in return for assistance, none of the fighters would step forward. No one was foolish enough to cross Adigo's gang, or more precisely, the monster Marlian, who backed Adigo. The fighters knew that Adigo's arrogance came from his belief in Marlian, the monstrous Babaraga, so they all quietly drank their beer, using the situation before them as mere entertainment. Then, when Adigo lightly smacked the nobleman's head. Boom! Something extraordinary happened. Start talking. A sudden appearance. One of the 4 Baba-Yagas in the colony. Hey! The atmosphere cracked with electricity as Seal rang, the golden flash appeared. Lightning, her signature, crackled around her body. Which bastard? Adigo, who had been knocked into the wall, stood up confidently but was left confused by Sealrang's sudden entrance. Sealrang. Mumbling in disbelief, it was as if he couldn't comprehend the situation, though he recognized the person standing before him. However, what did you do to my master? At Sealrang's following words, Adigo's expression shifted from confusion to terror. Ara! Before he could react, Sealrang grabbed Adigo's head and slammed it to the ground. Crack! The fighters could hear the chilling sound reverberating in their ears. But it didn't end there. Sealrang, with a cold expression, grabbed Adigo's leg and flung him aside. Crash! Adigo was hurled into the pub. As he scrambled to get back up, he tried to speak. Wait, I didn't know. Crack! Sealrang grabbed his head again and smashed it into the counter. For real? Over and over. Hey! Over and over. If you keep doing this, my boss will. Over and over. Please spare. Crack! Silence. All the fighters watched, their mouths shut, staring at the wreckage of the pub. Even the owner, who should have been angry about the damage, stood there trembling, holding his breath in terror. A customer, seated at a shattered table, remained frozen, holding a heavy mug of beer. And then... thud! Sealrang, covered in blood, finally released Adigo's head without a trace of interest. At that moment, all the fighters present shuddered in awe. Her speed was beyond their perception, and the way she effortlessly handled an A-class fighter like a mere underling left them in reverence. As Sealrang, who hadn't even broken a sweat, glanced at the trembling thugs surrounding Alone. Boom! Crackle! In the blink of an eye, she had sent them all flying. They crashed into walls and windows, convulsing before going limp. The fighters, who had witnessed Sealrang show no mercy and crush every opponent without emotion in the Colosseum, shuddered as they watched the Golden Flash, who had become a Babaraga, once again. Master! You're here! You should have told me. Before anyone realized it, Sealrang, who was now smiling brightly and playfully wagging her golden tail, wrapped her arm around Alone's. Everyone around her froze for a moment. "I've been waiting so long for Master to arrive. I prepared a lot of things, so let's go quickly." Regardless of the fighter's confusion, Sealrang, still wagging her tail and grinning, pulled Alone along and started moving somewhere. As Sealrang and the nobleman disappeared into the distance, the fighters watching were left with a bewildering question. Who is that guy? Who could make that mad dog? They were left wondering who the nobleman was, the one Sealrang referred to as her master. However, Alone, who was being dragged by the blood-covered Sealrang, was just as bewildered as the fighters. Despite feeling grateful and oddly proud, he couldn't help but wonder. Am I not going to die? Since Alone arrived at the colony well into the afternoon, by the time Sealrang led him to a particular building, the sun was already setting. This is it. Following Sealrang, who perked her ears up and entered the building, Alone thought to himself quietly, it's big. As he stared blankly at the building, which rose more than 9 stories high, unlike most others in the area, he heard Evan's admiring voice beside him. Wow, it's huge! Although it didn't have the vast feel of Deus Mansion, tall buildings were rare in this city, making the contrast more striking. After entering the building with Evan and Sealrang, they headed straight for the top floor. Ah, boss, you're back. Boss! As they approached the top floor, they passed several beast folk who greeted Sealrang with stiff salutes, all of them, like Sealrang, having golden hair. Boss, welcome back. When they finally reached the top floor, another beast folk, who seemed to have been waiting at the door, greeted them with a bow. This one also had golden hair but bore a long scar across one side of his face. Yeah, nothing happened, right? Nothing at all. Sealrang smiled cheerfully as she chatted and opened the door, walking inside. Alone and Evan followed her in. While entering, Alone felt the gaze of the beast folk standing at the door, and as he was about to look back. It seems a bit different from the rumors. Rumors? Alone couldn't help but show a puzzled expression at Evan's remark. Evan, looking ahead at Sealrang, explained, yeah, I've heard that Sealrang doesn't have the best reputation. How so? They say she has an extremely cruel personality. They call her the Mad Dog, I think? Though I've also heard that she treats her own kind a bit more gently. Sealrang. Alone glanced over at Sealrang. Master! You can sit here. Sealrang, wagging her tail excitedly, was already sitting cross-legged on a mat she had prepared in her office. She patted the top seat of the mat energetically. That earlier scene was kind of terrifying. Alone briefly recalled the earlier violent outburst from Sealrang, but seeing her now grinning so brightly, he just shrugged and sat down. With that, the real conversation with Sealrang began. In truth, Alone had been somewhat worried about how he would carry on a conversation with Sealrang. Although his previous conversation with Deus had ended well, Sealrang was unpredictable, and he wasn't sure how things would unfold with her. However, contrary to Alone's concerns. Great! What? Great! The conversation with Sealrang turned out to be, in some ways, even easier than with Deus, leaving Alone a bit bewildered. Did you really listen to everything I said? Yeah. And you can speak casually with me. Sealrang spoke energetically. Even now, she couldn't seem to sit still. While still cross-legged, she casually placed her hands on the ground and began to do a handstand. Watching her with a blank expression, Alone commented, still, don't you have a lot to think about? I've heard you're running a guild as well. During their brief conversation, Alone learned that, aside from becoming a Babaraga in the colony, Sealrang had also gathered others of their kind and formed a guild, prompting him to ask. Sealrang, now in an odd handstand position, seemed to ponder for a moment. It's fine. Really? Yes. Even if we're not family, you're my master. Sealrang's enthusiastic response left Alone nodding a bit awkwardly, but deep down, he felt the same sense of pride he had when dealing with Deus. After all, he hadn't expected Sealrang to go so far to help him, especially since he hadn't been in contact or even sent a letter. Honestly, I didn't expect her to help this much. From Alone's perspective, it wasn't a bad thing to receive such help. He continued their conversation, feeling a paternal warmth growing in his heart. They talked about many things, though most of it was nothing particularly special. Alone asked about how Sealrang had been, sharing stories about Deus, while Sealrang told him about her life in the colony. Then, as if something had come to mind, Seal Rang spoke with a sigh. Thanks to you, I was able to gather the scattered members of our tribe. Because of me? Yep, look. Seal Rang smiled brightly and showed the glove she wore on her right hand, which Alone quickly recognized as an essence of the Golden Manor tribe. I see. So there really was something to the saying that meeting the Golden Manor tribe unlocks their true power. Alone began to understand why Seal Rang had a favorable view of him. As they continued talking for a bit longer, Seal Rang suddenly shifted the topic. Come to think of it, the desert is quite dangerous. Why's that? Seal Rang tilted her head in curiosity at Evan's remark. We were attacked. Attacked? Yeah. At the word attack, Seal Rang's cheerful smile momentarily froze, but Alone nodded in agreement with Evan. We were ambushed by the Bloodsand bandits, even though we moved during the daytime, when they're usually not active. Really? They're some bad guys, aren't they? They're definitely not people I'd want to meet again. Alone shrugged as he recalled the incident and looked at Seal Rang. She seemed to be trying to mask her earlier serious expression with her usual carefree smile. After a bit more conversation, Seal Rang spoke up again. Anyway, for now, take some rest. You must be tired from coming all the way here, right? With that, Seal Rang gave Alone and Evan each a room just below the top floor. After settling them in, she returned to the top floor and, with a smile, spoke softly. Ralga. Yes. Ralga, the beast folk with a scar on his face, appeared instantly at her call. Where are those bad guys? The Bloodsand bandits have set up camp to the northeast, but there's something else I should mention. What is it? As far as I know, the Bloodsand bandits are backed by Kalman, one of the other 3 Baba Yagas. Ralga's words carried a tone of concern. Really? But still. Despite the information, Seal Rang merely wagged her tail once, showing no sign of hesitation. Messing with my master is not allowed. Her response indicated that the news about Kalman would not change her course of action in the slightest. If he finds out, I'll definitely get scolded, you know. Muttering quietly to herself, so softly that even Ralga couldn't hear, she gazed toward the northeast. Anyway, just wait here. With a deadly serious expression, her golden eyes flashing ominously, she continued. I'll kill them all. And with that, she vanished, leaving behind a crackling golden flash. The Bloodsand bandits were a large organization that had been active in the southern desert of the continent for a very long time. The number of members they commanded exceeded hundreds, and among them, most of the combatants were capable of imbuing their swords with magic, making them a force far too powerful to be considered mere bandits. Given the massive power the Bloodsand bandits possessed, it was only natural that they caught the attention of the nation of Colony, which was rooted in the desert. After all, the area where the Bloodsand bandits were operating was none other than Colony's capital city. Like the saying goes, a nail that sticks out gets hammered down. It would have been appropriate for the nation to take action and eliminate such a large bandit group. After all, when bandits loiter around, the nation inevitably suffers damage in some way. However, the reason the Bloodsand bandits could continue to operate so boldly near the capital's desert region was because they had powerful backing. And not just any backing, but from the most long-standing Baba Yaga of Colony, none other than the warrior, Kalman Arons. With Kalman supporting them, the group that should have been wiped out long ago grew from dozens to hundreds over a span of 10 years. Today, however, Draco, the leader of the Bloodsand bandits and Kalman Arons' trusted subordinate, was in a very bad mood. Jack is dead. Yes. The reason was that one of his men had gone out to raid a caravan today and was killed. Huh? Draco scowled in irritation. His frustration wasn't from the loss of a comrade, but because one of the labours he had painstakingly raised had died meaninglessly. I had planned to train him a bit more and use him as an assassin. Clicking his tongue, Draco asked, who killed him? It seems he was killed by a noble while targeting a mage. A noble? Jack? Yes. From what I heard, when the noble used magic, the middle of the desert froze over. What's their name? We're currently gathering information from our contacts in Colony, and we should have details by tomorrow. After a moment of contemplation, Draco responded, let me know as soon as we get the information. Naturally, Draco had no intention of letting the mage who killed Jack off the hook. I must avenge the waste of my resources. Of course, considering the noble status in a foreign country, killing him could lead to all kinds of complications, but Draco wasn't too concerned. Killing someone in the desert wasn't particularly unusual, and as long as there were no witnesses, most deaths in the desert were treated as disappearances. And Draco was one of the most experienced at such acts. Once he figured out the noble's identity, he planned to wait for the right moment to bury him when he tried to leave the desert. If only that hadn't appeared. Gark! Draco coughed up dark crimson blood as he looked in despair at his hideout. Just 10 minutes ago, the secret hideout of the Blood Sand Bandits, which had proudly stood for years, lay in ruins. But that wasn't all. The soldiers he had spent more than 10 years raising were all either buried in the sand or crushed against the hideout walls, meeting their end. And then... is that all? A pair of sharp golden eyes scanned the surroundings before vanishing in an instant. With a flash of gold lightning, the figure of Seal Rang reappeared, holding in both hands. This ends it. The heads of the bandits. The two heads retained expressions of tense anticipation, as if they were still unaware of what had happened, lying in ambush near the destroyed hideout for a surprise attack. Thud! Seal Rang, disinterested, tossed the heads far away, leaving Draco with a look of disbelief, unable to comprehend the situation. From start to finish. Everything. What in the world is this? Draco found himself staring at the Grim Reaper, who was now slowly approaching him. Step, step. In a single moment, the golden flash of light that had appeared had destroyed his kingdom, the hideout he had built, and wiped out the Blood Sand Bandits, the hundreds of men he had cultivated over more than 10 years. Step, step. The girl with golden eyes. The Reaper. As soon as those sharp, golden eyes fixed on Draco, he felt a shiver of primal fear run through his entire body. An instinctive fear. Even amidst this terror, Draco desperately tried to speak, to say something to save his life. Say, Seal Rang. Do you even know what you've done? Draco's voice was filled with desperation. His kingdom of 10 years, everything he had built, had crumbled like a sandcastle, but he had not given up. If he could survive, he believed he could rebuild his small kingdom again. But, unfortunately, Seal Rang showed no signs of reacting to Draco's frantic words. All she did was raise her blood-soaked right hand and grab the head of Draco, whose stomach had been pierced through. If you kill me now, you'll be making an enemy of Kalman Arons. I'm under his protection. Sensing his impending death, Draco tried to invoke Kalman's name, hoping to escape, but the strength in Seal Rang's hand only tightened. Is it money you want? Take it. Take all of it. Or do you want a tribute? I'll pay whatever tribute you want. His screams grew more frenzied, and at last, he began to wail in despair as he fully realized his approaching death. Why? Why are you doing this to me? Why? Why? His voice, full of resentment and frustration, rang out. In response. Because you laid a hand on my master. Anne. A muttered whisper reached Draco's ears. It wasn't loud, but neither was it small. Just a quiet murmur. And then. Because I don't want to get scolded. With that soft whisper, recalling her red eyes, Seal Rang crushed Draco's head with a loud asterisk crack star. With her mission complete, Seal Rang disappeared, leaving nothing behind. In mere 10 minutes, the Blood Sand Bandits, who had terrorized the desert under Kalman's name for over a decade, vanished from history. The next day, alone, feeling the fatigue from his long travels melt away, received 2 pieces of news. The first was that entering the Forgotten City would not be possible for another 3 days. The second was, Count, I heard that the Blood Sand Bandits who attacked us have been completely wiped out. The Blood Sand Bandits. It was the group that had attacked him not long ago, now apparently annihilated. Yes, they were completely wiped out. When? From what I've heard, it happened yesterday. An entire bandit group wiped out, and rumors already spread in a day. As Alone furrowed his brow in confusion, Evan nodded. The entire city is buzzing with the news. Apparently, the caravan that arrived earlier today shared the information. At Evan's words, Alone felt as if 1,000 question marks were hovering over his head. The Blood Sand Bandits weren't supposed to disappear for another 3 years, not unless they were dealt with by the protagonist, Eli Van, as the original story dictated. Why on earth did they suddenly vanish? With a puzzled expression, Alone tried to figure it out, but I took care of it. The answer came far more simply than expected. You did? Yep. Didn't I do a great job? At Seal Rang's innocent grin, both Alone and Evan slowly opened their mouths in astonishment. You dealt with the Blood Sand Bandits? Yup. Why? Alone asked instinctively. Well, didn't Master say so? Evan glanced at Alone as if to ask, did you, while Alone stared blankly at Evan. But that only lasted for a moment. You said you didn't want to see them again. I did say that, but if they're gone, you won't have to see them anymore, right? With a wide, innocent smile, Seal Rang nodded as if she'd just solved a grand dilemma, leaving Alone with the same feeling he'd had when he first met Deus, a feeling that something about this was just too much. But that moment of bewilderment soon passed, and Alone suddenly thought of something and asked. Wait, so you wiped out the entire Blood Sand Bandit group all by yourself? That's right. Seal Rang nodded nonchalantly, and Alone found himself falling silent without realizing it. The Blood Sand Bandits he knew numbered in the hundreds, with most of the combatants capable of imbuing their weapons with magic, hardly the kind of group to be taken lightly. Moreover, Draco, the leader of the bandits, was someone who, as far as Alone knew, would be able to wield an aura blade 3 years from now. And yet, Seal Rang had just single-handedly killed hundreds of night-level combatants, including Draco, their leader. He knew that the title of Baba Yaga wasn't something one could earn lightly, but wasn't this a bit stronger than he had expected? Alone stared blankly at Seal Rang, who was grinning carefreely, and suddenly recalled that in the future she would become the embodiment of the sin of pride. With that thought, he found his posture becoming more reverent. This was 3 days before their departure for the Forgotten City. At the time when Alone left for the desert city of Colony, a secret meeting was taking place in a small tavern in the eastern part of Tyria, the capital of the Kingdom of Asteria. So, why did you call for me, Duke? I didn't think your intuition had dulled to the point where you had to ask, Marquis, said Duke Rimgrave, leader of the Royalist faction. At those words, Marquis Filboid, leader of the noble faction, sat down naturally and spoke. I assume this is about Count Palatio. You're sharp. I called you because of Count Palatio, or more precisely, the Calfa that those brats gathered together, Rimgrave replied. The Marquis nodded, as if no further explanation was needed. Having spent decades navigating the treacherous world of politics, they both easily understood that the Duke was seeking an alliance to bring down a Calfa. The Calfa group was an obnoxious organization that posed a threat to both the Royalist and noble factions, and it needed to be dismantled as soon as possible. In their world, yesterday's enemies could become today's allies depending on their interests, so it wasn't difficult for them to join forces. So, what's your plan? Phil Boyd cut straight to the point without delay. Admiring the Marquis' quick judgment, having already calculated the costs and benefits in just a few words, the Duke responded, I plan to involve Rosario. Rosario? Yes, to be specific, the Cardinal of Rosario. The Duke began to lay out his detailed plan for the Marquis. After some time had passed. And what's the demand? Phil Boyd asked, as if there was no need to hear anything further. Half of the bribe to stuff the Cardinal's mouth. Not bad. The two nobles exchanged thoughts, both smiling in satisfaction. If their plan went well, the upstart Calfa group, made up of rabble from the underworld, would crumble like a sandcastle. It won't take long. In fact, I've already made contact. I'm looking forward to it. With that, both men left the tavern with smiles on their faces, heading in different directions. Only 2 whiskey glasses, still filled with drink, were left behind in the rundown tavern. The desert nation, Colony. The Colosseum, which serves as both the heart and landmark of the nation, shares the same name as the capital. The Colosseum is always filled with the public's cheers and madness, as it is constantly stained with the blood shed by gladiators. Even when a gladiator gets stabbed or loses their life, everything that happens in this Colosseum is merely entertainment for the masses. But now, the Colosseum was silent. It wasn't that the public wasn't present. The Colosseum was packed with so many people that even the stairways, where people were supposed to move, were crammed with bodies. Could it be that the match hadn't started yet? No, that wasn't the case. Already, hundreds of gladiators of various ranks were standing in the spotlight. There was only one odd thing. While hundreds of gladiators gathered on the right side of the arena, on the left side, only one man stood. A fight that appeared imbalanced to anyone watching. Yet, the man standing alone on the Colosseum grounds had no complaints. Instead, a thin smile played on his lips. The iron gauntlets on the man's hands gleamed. As soon as the referee's voice, amplified through magic, echoed, the hundreds of gladiators began rushing toward the man. Some with swords, some with fists, and others with axes. Gladiators of all sorts, ranging from A rank to B rank, all charged in, aiming for one man's neck. However, despite the ferocious glints in their eyes, the man's face still carried a deep smile, while the gladiators rushing at him bore intense tension in their eyes. Because everyone here knew who the man standing before them was. One of the Baba Yagas of this colony. The man who had held the position of Baba Yaga for the longest time. Kalman Arons. As Kalman grinned, he shifted into position. His left foot slid behind his right, and his right hand followed suit, pulling back. Every muscle in his body tensed instantly. And just before the gladiators reached him, Kalman threw a punch. A punch aimed at the empty air. A punch aimed at no one, yet capable of striking anyone. Boom! As the shockwave erupted, the hundreds of gladiators rushing toward him were blown away in all directions in an instant, and with Kalman's body vanishing. Crash! A ruthless massacre began. Each time Kalman's obsidian gauntlet extended, the bodies of the gladiators trying to recover were shattered. For 5 minutes, the Colosseum was filled with silence, leaving only the fallen gladiators and Kalman. After a brief moment of silence. Woo! The Colosseum exploded with a frenzy of cheers, as if the previous quiet had been a lie. The crowd, crazed and wild, paid no attention to the gladiators whose heads had been crushed or whose hearts had been destroyed by Kalman. They only screamed and cheered madly for Kalman. As Kalman slowly scanned the crowd, still with a deep smile, he turned and walked back into the Colosseum. The luxurious waiting room reserved for the Baba Yagas. Listening to the never-ending cheers of the crowd, Kalman remarked, "There are still so many foolish people. Thinking they could defeat a Baba Yaga with mere numbers, hundreds of them." Turning at the sound of a voice from behind, Kalman found another man grinning. The man was Marlian, also known as a Baba Yaga, his bald head twisted grotesquely on one side. As Kalman sat on a luxurious chair, Marlian continued, "Do you know who wiped out the Bloodsand bandits?" "No." "Did you find out?" Marlian immediately responded to Kalman's question. "It was Sealrang." "Is that so?" After a brief silence, Kalman finally spoke. But there was no particular anger in his voice. Only a faint acceptance, as if saying, "So, that's how it was." "Doesn't seem like you're very upset." Marlian asked, slightly puzzled. Kalman leisurely leaned back in his chair. "Not really? In the first place, I kept him around just because he brought in some pocket money. Besides, we're going to kill him anyway, right?" Kalman responded with a sly smile. "True, that's the plan." "So, what's the plan?" As Kalman asked, Marlian flashed a quick grin and extended his left hand before Kalman. In his hand was a black cube. "Oh ho, is this the abyssal core? The one that can elevate the worthy?" Marlian nodded as Kalman twisted his mouth into a smile. "Yes, with this, I can crush that arrogant beastkin's head." "That's music to my ears." Kalman lifted the cube from Marlian's hand. Gazing at the abyssal object, which seemed to absorb all light, he muttered with satisfaction. "Finally, I can kill the bastard that's been tearing through Colony as if it were her own playground." "I agree. Just a few days ago, I suffered because of her as well." "Anne." Marlian sighed deeply, revealing a bit of his frustration as he nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Kalman spoke again. "So, when will the plan be executed?" "In 2 days at the ruins." "That's quick. Isn't quick better? Once that girl's dead, you can start eating away at the royal authority again. And you can take over the entire underworld, right?" "Exactly." Marlian smiled as they reaffirmed their shared goals. "There's no way we'll fail. Because of the abyssal core." "That too, but we also have some friends on the other side." With those words, Marlian continued. "Oh, and if you see that noble next to Sealrang, it would be great if you could take care of him as well." "Why?" "Just a small request. I hear he's Sealrang's master. Wouldn't it be fun to kill him first, right in front of Sealrang?" That does sound like it could be fun." With Kalman's smiling response, Marlian disappeared, leaving behind a promise to meet again in 2 days. Finally, Kalman sat in his throne, more greed-driven than any other, a deep smile on his lips. About 2 days later, alone, fully rested after staying at the guild, boarded a carriage with Sealrang, heading to the ruins. After some time had passed, they were almost at their destination. Looking out at Sealrang, who was chatting casually with the golden-maned beastkin guarding the carriage, Alone thought to himself. She's nothing like the rumors suggest. It had been only about 4 days since Alone arrived at the colony, but he had already grasped Sealrang's reputation within it. A mad dog. Alone made a peculiar expression. The rumors often portrayed Sealrang as a mad dog, and naturally, he grew curious. After all, since their initial meeting, Sealrang had never shown any such behavior in front of him. For the past 3 days, all he saw was Sealrang smiling brightly and wagging her tail. Master. Alone snapped out of his thoughts as Sealrang, who had stopped talking to the beastkin, was now staring at him. You seem deep in thought, Master. What's on your mind? Nothing much. As Sealrang tilted her head to the side, almost enough to twist her neck, Alone hesitated for a moment before answering. I just thought you're good at looking after the guild members. Of course. They're all my family. Family? Yeah. They're all my kin. I have to take care of them. I don't care about anyone else. Is that so? Oh, but not you, Master. Sealrang said, her expression suddenly becoming serious as she stared intently at him. As if she was considering something important, her brow furrowed as she murmured. Master, family, after family. No, after Yusha. Is that so? Yeah, no matter how important you or Yusha are, you're not blood-related. As if she had made a difficult decision, Sealrang concluded with a slightly apologetic expression. But Alone simply shrugged and thought to himself. Higher than I expected. Despite his expressionless face, Alone was pleased. Considering that he had barely spoken to Sealrang, let alone exchanged letters, the fact that he was being treated as the third most important person in her life was quite satisfying. Does that mean if something dangerous happens later, I could probably ask for help once? As Alone finished his thoughts with a bit of relief, the coachman suddenly called out. We've arrived. The carriage had reached the city of Kahara, the ancient city of gods. At the entrance to the ruins, now called by that name, the city was once known as Kahara, the city of the old gods, at least according to his knowledge as a player. Alone stepped out of the carriage and began walking deeper into the dark cave, organizing his thoughts. Where should I start looking? In Psychedelia, Alone had visited this place multiple times. However, those visits were only for side quests to deal with the bandits hiding here, not to uncover any hidden secrets. I do remember there being a place with lots of writings. Using his in-game knowledge, he decided to focus on certain areas that stood out in his memory after entering Kahara. He was pinpointing a few spots to explore in more detail. After walking for some time, when Sealrang's expression started showing signs of boredom, Alone noticed a group walking ahead, much further in front than his party. Before long, he recognized who they were. Ah, Count Palacio. Lian. The woman approaching from the darkness, illuminating the way with light magic, was none other than Lian Aguileras, daughter of the Red Tower's master, along with a group of Red Tower wizards whom Alone had encountered during his recent visit to the desert city of Colony. Alone, noticing that the confused looks of the 20 or so wizards had shifted to slightly surprised expressions, felt a bit taken aback himself. Are you here to explore the ruins too, Count? Lian asked. Indeed, Alone nodded in response to her question, and naturally, he began walking alongside the Red Tower wizards as they continued exploring the ruins. After walking for some more time, Alone heard Evan, who was also starting to look bored like Sealrang, say, "There's the exit." Alone followed Evan's gaze toward the exit and, finally stepping outside, was greeted by an incredible sight. Wow! The wizards, beastkin, and even Sealrang couldn't help but exclaim in awe. The sight before them, after stepping outside, was that of a massive fortress within an underground cavern. However, Alone wasn't particularly surprised by the scene. He had already seen this enormous fortress several times before. But even so, his usually expressionless eyes widened slightly more than usual because, in his ear, he heard something that no one else could. "You've finally come, magician." A voice that only he could hear. Right after arriving in Kahara, the city of the old gods, the wizard of the Red Tower, Lian, Sealrang, and the Golden Manor tribe decided to wait near the entrance, where they had the best view of the city. Of course, Sealrang and Evan tried to follow Alone, but Alone left them at the entrance and went down into the city alone. There was only one reason for that. Since you can hear the voice, you've at least shown a minimum level of respect. Come alone to the central tower of Kahara. This was because, as soon as Alone entered Kahara, he heard a voice whispering such words to him. Naturally, he had no idea whose voice it was that whispered into his ear. Though he had been to this city more than dozens of times, never before had a voice like this echoed in his mind. However, instinctively, he realized that it had something to do with the words left behind by a mysterious being. Without hesitation, he moved forward and finally arrived at the center of Kahara. It was less of a forgotten city and more fitting to describe it as a fortress, given how tall the tower was, especially for an underground structure. Staring at the tower blankly, Alone soon walked inside. Upon entering, what greeted him was a spiral staircase leading upward. Without a word, Alone began to climb the stairs. Flare! As he ascended the staircase, the lights began to ignite one by one, as if to illuminate his path. Though it was a situation he had never seen in the game, which made him hesitate momentarily, that was all. Following the lights, Alone continued his steps, and eventually, when he reached the top of the long staircase, he found a massive room. Ratatatat tilde! Along with the activation of a magic circle, he saw the previously empty room fill with enormous bookshelves. The bookshelves rose from the ground and soon covered the entire tower. At that moment, except for the sky and ground, there was no clear distinction between front and back. You've arrived. In fact, not all members of the Golden Mane tribe had an unusual affection for other bloodlines. Of course, compared to other beast folk, the Golden Manes had a relatively high species-wide affinity for each other. Though it meant little now, the Golden Mane tribe had once stood at the top of the beast folk hierarchy 500 years ago. But even so, their affection wasn't deeper than what they had for their own families. They merely had a slightly higher affinity for one another than for other species, and that was it. In the end, they were still strangers to each other. Nevertheless, the reason why Sealrang was so obsessed with her kin and cherished the Golden Mane tribe so deeply was because of her past. Her happiness lay in the past. She had enjoyed the days spent living with her kin, found fulfillment in helping her father wrap up the day, and was happy to sit at the table in the evening, eating meals with her family. The life she led in a community where only the Golden Mane tribe lived, where everyone was bound under the concept of kin, still remained a source of happiness for Sealrang. That's why Sealrang sought revenge against the Black Dragon who shattered that happiness and aimed to gather her kin to reclaim it. Her respect for the Great Moon also stemmed from that. She believed that the essence of the Golden Mane tribe, which Alone had given her, could bring her both revenge and happiness once again. And for her? Crunch dash. Who? The death of one of the Golden Mane tribe was enough to drive her reason into a raging fury. Right before her eyes, the body of her kin, who had been speaking just moments ago, crumbled so pitifully. And at the same time, what appeared before her was HMPH tilde is this all? It was none other than Marlian. Nothing much. Marlian of Baba Yaga. With his hideous face twisted in grotesque pleasure, he threw aside the corpse of the Golden Mane tribe. At the same time, dozens of black-robed figures appeared behind him. What the? Prepare for battle! At his command, the wizards of the Red Tower and the mercenaries he had hired raised their staffs with tense expressions. The previously relaxed faces of the Golden Mane tribe quickly turned to those of panic and fear. And then? What do you think you're doing? Marlian, staring directly at Sealrang, who was making an unmistakably menacing expression, twisted his lips into a sneer and spoke. Are beast folk truly this dumb? You're asking me that question, in this situation? His voice was full of mockery, clear to anyone who heard it. Upon hearing this, Sealrang narrowed her eyes, realizing there was no longer any need for words. Crackle dash! Electricity erupted from her body, scattering in all directions, and her gleaming golden eyes locked onto Marlian as her target. 1. In that instant, Sealrang twisted her body, narrowly evading an attack brought on by an unsettling, instinctive feeling. Boom tilde! The ground exploded with a deafening sound, as if a massive meteor had crashed into it, leaving a gaping crater. Wow, you dodged that? You're not just any ordinary opponent, who? Soon, a man who had completely demolished the entrance, Kalman Arance, casually walked out of the dust with a deep grin. Seeing Kalman stand next to Marlian as if they had planned it, Sealrang let out a bitter laugh. The events that had just transpired allowed her to grasp the situation. Sealrang clenched her fist tightly. Crackle dash! Electricity sparked to life in response to her will. Her stance made it clear that no more conversation was necessary. Wait! Wait! What is the meaning of this? We are wizards of the Red Tower. And you all are from Baba Yaga, aren't you? Unlike Sealrang, one of the wizards of the Red Tower desperately shouted in an attempt to escape the situation. As Marlian turned his gaze toward them, the wizard added, Red Tower wizards, who? I suppose it could cause some trouble if we mess with you. His words hung in the air. That's right. If any harm comes to us now. But the wizard tried to continue, but Marlian immediately interrupted, not allowing him even a moment's respite. That would only be a problem if any of you made it out alive, wouldn't it? With a twisted smile, Marlian's words made the wizard's face go completely rigid. The wizard wasn't foolish enough to misunderstand his meaning. And so, TSK, if only you hadn't made such a fuss, none of this would have been necessary. Why did you have to make things difficult for everyone? Now that I think about it, where's that noble we're supposed to take care of? He should have been with you, right? Well, we can deal with that after we kill this one first. Kalman casually responded to Marlian's words and said, Now, let's see. Black, sinister energy swirled around him, terrifying to anyone who saw it. Shall we run a little experiment? Boom dash. With that, the battle began, as Kalman hurled his fist toward Sealrang. Alone, realizing that the voice that had echoed in his mind was now coming from directly in front of him, lifted his head. There, sitting at a desk, was a figure. It was impossible to define its appearance. To be exact, it seemed as though something was constantly disrupting any attempt to describe its form. It looked human, beast-like, and monstrous all at once. As Alone stared blankly at the figure, whose shadow seemed to shift infinitely, it spoke. Do not stare too long. You won't be able to perceive my existence no matter how hard you try. With those words, Alone snapped out of his daze, remained silent for a moment, then asked, Who are you? If you cannot even comprehend my form, what makes you think you can comprehend my name? Did you know I was coming? How could I? Do you have any idea how long I've been trapped here? Yet, you spoke as if you did know. Not at all. Perhaps you were mistaken. Alone suddenly felt the urge to flick the head of the formless figure sitting before him, but he held back and spoke instead. I came here following the words of Oltholtus, or rather, of the mysterious entity. I had a hunch that might be the case. The figure responded in a slightly intrigued tone and continued. Did that being tell you its true name? Well, it seems reasonable enough to think you're worth testing. Alone fell silent for a moment as he watched the figure nod as if this conclusion was quite logical, then spoke again. Testing what, exactly? Testing your chance. I mean, an opportunity for you. An opportunity. As Alone muttered to himself, the figure elaborated. You seem to have many questions. Unfortunately, I cannot provide you with any answers right now. You lack the qualifications. And what is that supposed to mean? Curious about a setting he had never encountered in the game, Alone asked further. To clarify in advance, it's not my judgment you should be concerned with. Rather, it's this world's standards that determine your worth. After saying this, the figure seemed to ponder something for a moment before continuing. You probably don't understand and have many questions. So I'll explain it simply. It soon spoke again. Before long, another outsider will descend into this world. Deal with that being and return to me. And if I do, then you will have met the minimum requirements, the requirements to see me properly and have your questions answered. So you're saying I can't learn anything right now? Well, I can at least give you one hint. The figure, whose form was still too ambiguous to define, looked directly at Alone and smiled. Once you leave the tower, go and read the text at the easternmost end of this fortress. That should give you a general idea of the situation. The text at the eastern end, Alone murmured, and the figure dragged out its response before speaking again. Good, I've made my decision. In fact, my explanation ends here, but since you've come all this way, I'll share something interesting with you. Without giving Alone a chance to ask, the figure continued. In this world, beyond the use of incantations, there is a concept known as Sully, the natural order. Have you heard of it? Sully? Yes, and beyond that is self-manifestation, but that's still far beyond your reach. After murmuring to itself for a moment, the figure resumed explaining to Alone. Sully is the foundation for what those in this world call magic, though the fools who wield it barely understand its basics. I can see that you're better than they are, but you're still using it incorrectly. The figure continued speaking as if it found the current situation amusing. The magic manifested through incantations follows the natural order. It's not something you can just throw together haphazardly. Only by following the natural order, carefully constructing the incantation, and invoking the proper name can true magic be performed. The figure raised a finger and added, "But even with this explanation, I doubt you'll understand. So, as a gift, I'll teach you that Sully, the natural order." It concluded by saying, "This is what true magic is.